He's John McMullen Jody McDonald. That makes us Mac here on Birds 365. The 11-1 Birds get back to work, or at least walk through today, in preparation for their game coming up on Sunday against the Giants. And that will be in MetLife Stadium, where Johnny Mac, they have changed the turf. They had that slit turf because they play as many games as they do there with both the Jets and the Giants sharing the stadium. So they did change it. They didn't go to grass, but they did go to a different type of turf field. The issue isn't the turf. The issue isn't what the surface is. The issue is the NFL allowed the Jets and Giants to have a stadium, use it together, so they both didn't have to shell out for billion-dollar stadiums. And when you share it, it's going to get beat up. If it was grass, it'd be tremendously.
Yeah, I was just surprised how much, there's a bunch of people contacted me this week about the turf there and how players complain, and because I had not really heard that much about it, not following the Giants and Jets that closely, but obviously with the Eagles and Jalen Hurts last year. And by the way, it's Wednesday. I got to bring that in. So you know what that means, Jody. Mike Gill's not here to partake, but
potential awards for Philadelphia Eagle players.
Not potential. For the second consecutive week, the soon-to-be MVP of this league, Jalen Hurts, NFC Offensive Player of the Week, for the second consecutive week.
Very nice,
Jalen Hurts. Offensive
but last week was the first time he got it. He'd gotten player of the month
previously. Correct. Right. Second consecutive week. It's been almost every week. Defensive player. Brandon Graham won defensive player earlier in the season. Hassan Reddick. Special teams, surprisingly. Zach McPherson won it. Cameron Dicker won it.
Wait. Zach McPherson won Special Teams Player of the Week?
Week 1. He won Special Teams Player of the Week in Detroit, week 1.
And I thought you meant this past week.
No.
Earlier in the year. I was going to say, Eagles had some guys that stepped up on special teams. One of their best special teams was easily their best special teams week of the year. Either Ellis, the addition, or Kobe Dean, or Britton Covey would be the guys I would have thought if someone was going to win it this past week for the Eagles.
Yeah, I would have given it to Christian Ellis.
Yeah.
But no, they've had so many. This is players of the week all year, which they certainly lead the NFL, like everything else. But Jalen Hurts, second consecutive, that's rare. I was trying to look. The league didn't note who the previous one would be. But that's rare. Here we go. Becomes the first Eagle player to ever win a Player of the Week award in consecutive weeks. All right, not that rare. Second player to do it this season. Josh Allen, AFC Player of the Week, Offensive Player of the Week, consecutive weeks, weeks 5 and week 6. But still, it's pretty impressive.
No, I'm glad that Hurts got it because Sundays on CBS, when I jump in with Zach Gelb on Eye on Football, their Around the League show that they do for 8 hours on Sundays, I give a helping hand for the last 2. We give out game balls at the end, 3 apiece. And I debated on whether to give it to Jalen Hurts or to give it to A.J. Brown last week because they both had phenomenal weeks. A.J. is kind of dependent on Jalen to get him the ball, so the dynamic is a little bit different. And I went with Jalen just because Jalen did as much as he did with other players. It wasn't all A.J. Brown. A.J. was the number one target, but he also shared the ball around with Devonta getting over 100 yards as well. So that's why I went with him. So I'm glad the league agreed with me. I had to make that decision on Sunday. They will wait till Wednesday to hand out Player of the Week.
A.J. Brown just got getting first place GM's fired. That's what he's doing.
Yeah, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I think that part of it's a little bit overblown because everything I heard from our buddy Teron Davenport, as well as some other people I know down there, Robinson wanted to keep him as well. That was more of a organizational decision. Mike Vrabel really wanted to keep A.J. Brown. I mean, They really like each other. That's not bull, you know what. They had a big hug for each other before the game. If you go back to draft night, there's that viral clip that they had in the Titans draft room. Mike Vrabel was visibly upset when they made the deal, had to walk away from the table. So the head coach really liked AJ Brown. Um, the GM, you can kind of argue it both ways. They had significant salary cap issues, so that's the GM, right? And you're in a position where you can't pay your best offensive player. Well, you could argue,
Right. But
but
here's why I'm not sure that I buy that, John. They had the draft, they made the deal, and then after, Robinson signed a 6-year contract extension. If he was that put off by being dictated to, listen, you got to trade your best wide receiver. We're already paying Henry. We're not going to pay him too. We need to get as much as we can for him in exchange. If you were kind of dictated to and you're the general manager from above, why the hell would you sign a 6-year contract extension? Now he's getting paid. It worked out for him. If I'm him now, I'm kind of glad I did that because you're guaranteed to be getting that money for the next 5 years going forward. But if it was a disconnect within the organization, why do you think he signed that lengthy contract extension?
you're talking about Robinson.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a question for Amy Adams, I guess. I mean, it doesn't make sense. I mean, why would you fire a GM in season when you're in first place? I mean, it's something went on. So whether the head coach and the GM no longer get along and they pick the head coach, which is likely the scenario. But my only point is I think it's got more to do with what the Eagles showed about that rest of the roster. Like that was a weak roster. Now they took some hits. They had some injury issues coming into the game. Then they lost a corner. They obviously lost Treylon Burks. Their entire offense shut down. And Treylon Burks is Jody. He's shown some nice development over the past couple of weeks, but it's not like he's Justin Jefferson or Stephon Diggs or Jamar Chase. He's a nice young player. And he gets hurt on that play by Marcus Epps, and they're done. They're cooked. I mean, think about the Eagles with Reed Blankenship and Josiah Scott. Now we nitpick and we have nitpicked and said Josiah gets beat, but they've proven to be competent backup players. They completely fell apart with a bunch of backup players against the Eagles. And I think the Eagles I think everybody jumped on that. Well, AJ embarrassed the Titans. They fired the GM. I think it was more to do with, look, this roster is really top heavy and it really stinks at the bottom. But either way, it doesn't make sense to fire a GM in season of a first place team. So something weird is going on.
Right. Well, paint me as one of those guys who think, yeah, AJ Brown did what he did. Boom, stick a fork right in his eye. And that opened up the possibility because you're right. Prior to that, and they still are a first place team, but they're a first place team. They lost
a bad
the week before
division
against Cincinnati. Yeah, it's a bad division. They're leading a bad division, but they're our first place team. Oh, I think the straw that broke the camel's back was AJ Brown doing what he did to the Tennessee Titans this week. Now, you might know more than me behind the scenes that the organization was the one who really pushed for that trade, and they did so even with an objection from the general manager. We saw the video. We know there was an objection from the coach, but I don't know where Robinson actually sat on that. But
and that's part of it. By the way, that's partly his fault to put him at a position where they feel like they can't pay AJ Brown the going rate of receivers in the league and where it was going. That's partially John Robinson's fault because they didn't have cap space and, they weren't in a position to do it. So that's partially his fault.
Wait. Do you believe that? They were fine underneath the cap. They just made a football conscious decision of, we don't want to pay. And, oh, by the way, the Eagles do this all the time with certain positions. We don't value that position enough. We don't want to invest that kind of money in the position. The Titans weren't a terribly capped team this
I
year.
think they were 2.5. They could have worked it out. I mean, anybody can work it
That's
out.
what I
We see it
mean.
all the time.
I don't buy
We see
that
it
line of
all the
logic.
time.
I think it was just they didn't want to invest in a wide receiver.
They didn't have a ton of cap space, but again, it's how he proves you can manipulate things and kick things down the road, kick the can down the road. They could have done that. But the Eagles have an organizational philosophy. Remember, we're used to that. Like a lot of other teams don't like to do that. Jeffrey Lurie's a part of that as well. He rubber stamped. Some ownerships don't want to do that. And you're right. Certainly, the position, that's a bad decision.
I agree.
As good as Derrick Henry is, you can't assume in perpetuity that you're going to be a bad passing team. Eventually you got to get a quarterback. You got to go. If Brian Tannehill's not good enough, you got to go in a different direction. And all of a sudden, you see how quickly it happened in Philadelphia. All of a sudden, things move quickly, and you might be a good passing team 2-3 years down. Who knows what Malik Willis turns into being? Who knows? But you can't just assume, oh, we're a run first team. We're going to be a run first team in perpetuity. That's a bad way to run a team. So, but look, Jeffrey Lurie doesn't get enough credit, for how the Eagles are run. And not everybody's run like the Eagles.
I agree with you there. Lurie has given Howie Roseman the power that he needs and the flexibility that he needs to be able to put together the kind of roster that the Eagles have this year. So I'm 100% with you that we need to give a tip of the cap a little bit more often to Jeff Lurie with what he's doing. All right. The team they're facing this Sunday, John, is a team that made major changes during the offseason. The Giants, I think, were at least 4 straight years out of the playoffs. Maybe it's 5. I haven't looked it up. I should, but it's been a while since the Giants have been in the postseason, and they needed changes. They made a couple of mediocre to poor coaching hires over the last several years. Dave Gettleman was hired because he was an ex-Giant, brought back, talking about hog mollies. Yeah, that didn't pan out a little bit for the Giants. So they needed to shake up the organization. They did, bringing in Shine and Dable from Buffalo, tap into a winning organization, which the Bills have been. Smart move. Got off to this great start, but now have lost 3 of their last 4 games, 4 non-wins in 4 out of their last 5, including the tie last week. I was slightly more bullish on the Giants than you were. You were like, they're doing it with mirrors, Joe. I don't know how they're 6-1 because the analytics and the stats just don't add up to a team being 6-1. What do you think? Something had to change. Was it strength of schedule, the teams they're playing? Sooner or later, that the water had to find its level. They're going to pay prices for not having a great statistical team. What do you think happened to the Giants?
They finally hired a good coach. You mentioned some of the, it was Ben McAdoo, and then it was
Pat Shurmur,
Joe Judge. Yeah, they did a bad job in the post Tom Coughlin era. McAdoo had the 1 season, and the Eagles were considering hiring him. And he won. I think that was the last time they made the playoffs. So that would have been Doug Peterson's first year. So that would have been 2016. And then I think they won 10, 11 games somewhere. Somewhere 10, 11 games with Ben McAdoo. And you say, oh, they got things going. And then he went, I think, 2-10. And they replaced him with Steve Spagnuolo. And then you went to Pat Shurmur and Joe Judge, which were disasters. They got a good coach, and Nick Sirianni, I talked about it earlier in the week, raved about him, but they've been 3 wins, 5 wins, 4 wins, 4 wins. I mean, they've been a bad football team for a long time now. And it started at the top, and now I think they've gotten it right with Brian Daboll. And Yeah, they signaled basically. There were two teams to me that signaled we're rebuilding. Chicago and the Giants. They were eventually, we're not good. We gotta rebuild this thing. And Brian Daboll's got them ahead of schedule. And they're winning football games. And no, it doesn't look great on paper. But 7-4-1 is pretty stinking successful for the talent level they have. And that tells you how good the coach has been. And Eagles fans should, now start paying attention to the Giants, because this is not the Giants of Ben McAdoo and Pat Shermer and Joe Judge. They got a good coach, and they're headed back in the right direction. They're going to continue to make good decisions. They're going to continue to add talent. But right now, they're not equipped to deal with the Eagles. They're just not equipped. I can't imagine. It would have to be US Zach. Like, what would have to happen for the Eagles to lose this game? Basically, we saw it. Washington, same thing. You got to play bad offensively. You got to play bad defensively. You got to turn the football over. You got to make mistake after mistake after mistake. Can it happen? Of course it can happen. But they do not have the explosive ability to keep up with the Eagles. Saquon Barkley and their best receivers, Darius Slayton. I mean,
And
Daniel
oh, by the
Jones is the
way,
quarterback.
Slayton's made plays for him. He averages 17 yards per reception. Now, he doesn't get enough receptions. The Giants don't throw the ball effectively enough over the course of a game, but 17 per reception, that's pretty damn good. But if you take him out, what other options do they have? They have nothing else on the outside.
Yeah.
They got the young tight end Bellinger back last week, and he got a couple of grabs after a scary injury he had. He got poked in the eye and was bleeding on the field. It was actually pretty ugly. They got him back last week, so
he's a good player. He's a good player.
Eagles need to be aware of him. But they had other than Saquon Barkley, what scares you about the Giants?
Nothing. Wan'Dale Robinson was, their rookie receiver, but he's hurt. He had some, at least explosive ability. Kenny Galladay has done nothing to the point they don't even play him. David Sills, Richie James. I'm looking at these receivers. I mean, nothing. They're not fearful, and that's when we keep talking about Reed Blankenship and how well he's playing. Zach brought up a good point, saying, "Well, the Eagles haven't played offenses that can take advantage of throwing the football in the middle of the field." And they're not going to do it again this week. So, where you would look at Reed Blankenship and say, oh, maybe we start to wring our hands a little bit. They don't have the ability to take advantage of it. So it's tough to, other than it's an NFC East game. Yeah, they tend to be closer. We all know all the tropes with division rivalries. Other than that, I can't be fearful of this team. Me from day one. I said I don't know, mirrors. Yeah,
right,
how they doing it?
You wrote off the Giants. You said they're not even trying to win. They're in full rebuild mode, and then sure enough, they're 6-1. How the hell is this happening? I didn't quite understand 6-1, but I gave them a little bit more credit than you do. But now the last 4 weeks, it looks like what you said was coming true. Yeah, they're just not that good. They found ways to win games that they hadn't been dominant and are overly impressive, but you look up at the scoreboard, end of the game, oh shoot, Giants won again. I give you one other thing that the Eagles have to be on top of this weekend defensively. Daniel Jones running the football.
Yeah.
I do enough shows in New York. I don't do as many as I used to, but I do one every once in a while. And Giant fans can't stand me because I point out the fact that Daniel Jones isn't a franchise quarterback. He was overdrafted when he was drafted, and they've continued to stick with him when he's not a franchise quarterback. How many playoff games have they won with Daniel? Oh, that's right. They haven't made the playoffs yet with Daniel Jones. And you go ahead and blame the coaching staff and everybody else. I'll tell you, Daniel Jones is just not a franchise quarterback, but he's a pretty athletic guy, and he can take off and make plays on the run. he actually averages more yards per run than Jalen Hurts does. Now, Hurts gets hurt by the fact that he gets a whole bunch of those 3rd and 1 dives into the middle of the line. He's getting 1 yard at a time, which brings his average run down. But Jones actually averages more per carry per run than he does.
Oh, yeah. He's been really effective. And that's been, and Saquon Barkley's having a big year as well, although he started to slow down a little bit because they've leaned on him. But he's having a great year running the football, almost 6 yards a carry. And for whatever reason, people don't recognize the fact that he's athletic. I don't know. Maybe he's a little goopy looking, a little lanky, but he's athletic and he can run the football. And the Eagles know that from the big run in Lincoln Financial Field. And people joked about that because he tripped himself.
I was going to say,
he did trip himself.
Eagles had nothing to do with him coming down.
No, he did trip himself, but he did go 70 yards or whatever before he tripped himself.
You got to be careful around the 10-yard line. And that was here in Philadelphia. They don't have that issue. Yeah, you make fun of that trip all you want. Jones hasn't tripped on the 10-yard line at MetLife Stadium.
No. But the bottom line is he was drafted, I believe, in 2019.
5th overall pick, 18, I think it was.
2019.
19. Oh, yeah. Oh, same draft as A.J. Brown. I ran those. Did I run those names by you yesterday here on Birds 365? I know I meant to.
No.
Okay, quick aside, and I'll let you get back to your point. We had this past week, A.J. Brown, the very motivated A.J. Brown, the maybe a little ticked off A.J. Brown at the Tennessee Titans for trading him. Back in 2019, when A.J. Brown came out, 51st pick in the draft in the second round, middle of the second round. The New York Giants didn't pass on him once. Didn't pass on him twice. Passed on him 3 times. They had 3 first-round picks in 2019. Daniel Jones, Dexter Lawrence.
Good player, by the way.
DeAndre Baker, a quarterback whose job was to cover A.J. Brown in the SEC. They took him at 30, 31, 32. They had a bottom of the first-round draft pick. Never called A.J. Brown's name out. So in case A.J. doesn't know it, which I can pretty much guarantee you he does, someone tell him this week, if you catch him down there today walking through, do point out to him, John, that the Giants passed on him 3 times in 2019, because I like the way the motivated A.J. Brown plays, if we can judge by last week against the Titans at all.
Yeah, well, I'll bring it up to him. I talk to A.J. every week. AJ's, yeah, I mean, DeAndre Baker, there were some off the field, obviously, issues with DeAndre. I don't think he had talent, obviously. I think he went to Georgia, right, DeAndre?
Yeah, Georgia guy. Played against A.J. Brown.
Yeah, he was a good player in college. Dexter Lawrence has turned into a really good player. And so they at least hit on one. Daniel Jones is the 6th overall pick. I just think I believe it was the Patriots who drafted Harry late in the first round. And so obviously they're looking at receiver. And I remember in the second round, Deebo Samuel, A.J. Brown. So the Patriots had the bigger question on what the hell they were thinking.
All right, but don't mention that to A.J. Just tell him the Giants passed on him 3 times. Get him good and riled up about sticking it in the Giants' eye the same way he did the Titans' eye this past week.
Yeah, he doesn't have. He really wanted to stick it in the eye of the Titans.
Understood, but you gotta come up with something to get him as motivated again this week.
AJ wanted to stay with the Titans, and he wanted to be there, and was disappointed. So I'm glad it worked out for him.
Agreed. All right, so Giants and Eagles this week. Hopefully the Eagles lose the coin toss and take the ball first, because I believe they'll go right down the field, stick in the end zone, just like they did this past week, and we don't have to worry about the coach deferring. You mentioned how Sirianni mentioned this week that even Brian Daboll and their former relationship with other teams are boys and our pals. We had that couple of weeks ago against Indianapolis with Frank Reich having been the Indy coach and then fired just before the two teams were supposed to meet. And we saw Sirianni and his reaction after the game. Are he and Dable that tight that this is something we need to keep our eye on again this week? Pregame handshake, postgame hug. How's it going to
Oh
play
yeah,
between those two
you're
guys?
going to see the pregame hug. Yeah, they're close. They've always, they only worked together the 1 year, but they've always stayed in contact. Now, Nick always says his three biggest influences are his dad, coaching, his coaching influence. Larry Karras, the name you always hear, is Mount Union coach, and Frank Reich. So it's not to that level. But as I said, Brian Daboll gave him his first full positional coaching job in Kansas City, and he liked him, and he took him under his wing, and thought he had a big future. And it was ironic that Nick beat Brian to a head coaching job by 1 year. But Brian was, he was an offensive coordinator. He was already on. And that year probably hurt Brian because they were 2-14. That probably hurt him and set him back. But he really took an interest in Nick and Jim Bob Cooter, and Nick has never forgotten it. So yeah, he has tremendous respect for Brian Daboll, but he's not Frank Reich.
Agreed, but he may turn out to eclipse Frank Reich. When you say he's not,
I
Frank
mean,
Reich, you mean
Frank,
in the
Nick's
pantheon
eyes.
of
Yeah.
who Nick Sirianni looks up to. He could become a better head coach than Frank.
Oh yeah,
over time.
but in Nick's eyes, well, nobody would beat Larry Karras. He thinks Larry Karras is Bear Bryant or Nick Saban, one of the greatest college coaches of all time, according to Nick.
One stat that I did come up with crunching some numbers for this upcoming game last night was, and I did not know this. You and I talk about the Giants every once in a while because they're divisional rival, and they did go off the 6-1 start. Now they come back to the pack. Their rankings across the league, they're not up there in offense. They're not up there in defense. And oh, by the way, they stink at special teams too. Did you know that they're actually ranked behind the Eagles in special teams? Going into last week, the Eagles were 32nd in the National Football League. There's 32 teams in the NFL, folks, which means they were dead last, but they had a good enough week that they skyrocketed up to number 29. The Giants are 30th. So not only aren't the Giants a threat with the ball or trying to defend the Eagles and keep them off the scoreboard, their special teams stink on ice like the Eagles do, too. Do you think this game is decided on specials, John? The less inept special teams?
I'm interested. Game? I'm interested in the Eagles special teams from the consistency standpoint. Can they do it again? Can they get better? Or is this the classic overcorrection? But you're right about, when we talk about, and I say the talent that doesn't match up with the record, and that's why I give Brian so much credit. So if you go to those grades, I assume you were getting them from PFF. I don't know. So the best overall team graded by PFF is the Eagles. Chiefs are second, 49ers third. A lot of teams that you would assume. The Giants, remember, are 7-4-1, right? So that's a pretty good record. And they'd be in the playoffs if the playoffs started today.
Correct.
Grading the overall teams, PFF has them 30th.
They're only the 30th ranked team in the
30th
NFL?
ranked team.
Holy mackerel, I didn't know that.
Over the Chicago Bears are 31 and the Houston Texans are 32. Arizona's better. The Chargers, they have rated very low. The Carolina Panthers, Jacksonville's 26. The Giants are the 30th ranked team from the film and he's finding ways to win games.
Yeah,
That is amazing.
that is good coaching.
Yeah.
Getting the most out of it. And oh, by the way, that special teams from the Giants that I told you is ranked down at the very bottom, now below the Philadelphia Eagles. If they had a guy who could step up, and I've actually been a fan of this guy because he is tremendously consistent. Graham Gano had a chance to win the game the other night.
He's a good kicker. He's a good kicker.
He's a very good kicker. But he had a 58-yarder with the game on the line, and he came up woefully short. I mean, the ball bounced in like the middle of the end zone. It wasn't like it just snuck under the crossbar. 58, which in the NFL now these days, there are guys making 60s all the time.
Yeah.
Who was it?
Sirloin
hit a 60 kicker earlier this year. Kicked it from 60. Then they took the penalty. So they backed it up, or he kicked it from 58, and then they backed it up to 63, and he made it again. So guys are making field goals of that range all the time. Gano wasn't even close. It like you could see it, and they give you the kind of difficult angle to be able to judge how much distance is on a kick.
They give you crappy angles on field goals. I've noticed that now.
They do.
They give you that field angle, which doesn't give you the perception. But yeah, so many guys.
It tells you whether it's going to be within the uprights, but you got no idea about distance. Yeah. Then they gave you the side angle. You go, holy mackerel, that wasn't even close. Yeah. So if the Giants need a long field goal against the Eagles, end of the first half or end of the game, you don't sweat it. Graham Gano's not going. He's not banging it home from 60.
Your guy banged through a 60-yarder last week. Greg the Leg.
Greg the Leg out of nowhere came back to pound a 60-yarder. He used to be good like that when he was on the Rams. He hasn't been good like that the last couple of years, but he's.
But there's a difference, Jody. He was kicking indoors, pristine conditions. You know,
that's true.
When you start, the Giants were at home last week, weren't they?
Yeah, it was at MetLife. Yeah.
So that's far more difficult. 58's difficult outside in the Northeast at this time of year, unless you're Justin Tucker, and he'll probably make it.
Yeah, he kind of, all the rules go by the boards when you're talking about Justin Tucker. All right, he's John McMullen. I'm Jody McDonald. Coming up next, we're going to go Eagles and the National Football League look at one of the best in the business who covers it all for the Associated Press. Rob Motti going to jump back in with us here on Birds 360.